I think our audience would like to make some comments. So I know there is already one. If you want to tell us, Hessel, there was a comment about. Can you unmute your microphone?
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Not very well. If you can speak a little bit more loudly.
I'll try.
Yeah.
I was curious if there was any knowledge about the functioning of the play system in this regard, because the play system is a need to socialize and to experiment with as if, and to seek, as it were, complicated situations, as far as I read Palace and Palace about playful brain. And it seems that that maybe by this child at 3 years old, which was functioning in the small family, but not engaging outside. It seemed to me that maybe this play system, Panksapian play system, was involved, but I do not know if there is any research in that direction. It is a complicated research play.
And this is a very interesting question. Maybe Iris would like to answer, because she spoke about Panksepp and emotional systems. Iris, are you there?
I don't hear you. I didn't hear. It was I was blocked out. I just heard that something is talking about the play system, whether there is a play system here.
Yeah, Hessel was Hessel was asking how much the play system is impaired in autism, and how it works together with the other emotional systems.
So would you like me to answer?
Yes. I think, yeah.
Someone else doesn't want, I can answer. The play system is a quite high system, meaning that you can, a play system is a, do you see me? Do you hear me? Because I think it's jumping here, so I'm not sure.
No, yes.
I'm connected, all right. It is, when you are able to regulate the other emotional systems, then play is working. Like if you're very angry, this play system, which is full of life, it is making life be fun and creative. This system is not working. So I don't know about the research talking about autism and play system. Maybe Paul knows better. But if I'm thinking conceptually that what is the play system? Play system is that you need to enjoy the interaction. I mean, the interaction, this is the social brain playing there. You need to enjoy the interaction, and you play with the other person, and then you are being emphatic. The play is working only if you can play it 60-40, not 100-0. Why not 100-0? Because if I am totally correct and the other person is not correct at all, nobody would like to come and play with me. People would like to play when it is a competition, and we can say, and you can say, and we can enjoy together, So this is play system is not the central system I will think about when I'm talking about autism or when a child is in such high panic.
But the point, my point was that I'm referring back to Turnbull's agenda, which he sketched in his speech to the UCL in London, that it was his vision that the DSM would be based on the 7 Panksapian emotion needs. And it's true what you say, as far as I read, play only functions when you're in a safe situation, of course. But this child seemed to be in a safe situation until the play system made her need to go into the world and play with equals, and that didn't function. And also, play is not only 60-40, it's also, as I read Palace and Palace, the playful brain, finding out risks, trying out dangerous situations in a as if situation. as Mark Solms said, play is essential for therapy, the functioning play system.
Yes.
So, of course, if you are unhappy, if you need support, the panic grief system kicks in. I understand, I see that. And even if you're then unsuccessful, rage kicks in. But when you're looking for where did it go wrong, it might be the play system.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I was thinking about it. I see Francesco has something to say.
Yeah. Yes, I was thinking about something common knowledge in psychoanalysis. Maybe it's not the case of described by Rosa, but in my opinion, and for my experience, when a patient or a couple describe the situation of the family as perfectly good, everything is going fine, is absolutely untrue. Also because we know that if a child is unable to make contact, to play with the peers, there is a problem inside the family. I mean, what is wrong is something that has to do with the safe harbor, let's say. That means that in the sense the care system is not working properly with the mother, with the father, even with the grandparents. And the effect in this, that's why my presentation was about transgenerational transmission of trauma. Because this is a family that is refugees, actually. They are refugees. And the mutism, could, as you said also, Rit, could be easily, I mean, it's suggestive at least, to link it to the effect of the trauma, massive social trauma in the family. And by the way, this the patient is the one speaking loudly, as Green said, with the silence, that something is extremely wrong, has been extremely wrong. Otherwise, we get lost. Because as we know, when there is such severe symptoms, let's forget about diagnosis. But mutism, elective mutism in a baby, in a child, is something extremely alarming. No? So in this sense, it could be symbiotic psychosis, that's my opinion, leading to autism. Could be something else, but for sure it's severe. There's something very wrong in the family. It's the family system, even transgenerational, that has not been probably working through emotions, very massive traumatic emotions, and that's the result. In the third generation, exactly, as usual.
Maybe for those.
Sorry.
I was just saying that maybe for those who are not Italian, so we can remind that that Jay's grandfather was a refugee following the Second World War, lost of Istria. They came from an Istrian, which is a former Yugoslavian town, and this town had to be abandoned in just a few days of.
Not only there was massive killings of people.
Yes, of course, but after that, all these people had to leave the town without knowing before, and it was very traumatic for these people. And so, it's not very well known, but in Italy it was quite a story because there was a lot of suffering and consequences in the next generations. We have other cases of this kind of problems.
There was a political and social denial of the trauma in Italy.
Yeah,
something not, of course, comparable to the Holocaust, not something alike.
Of course not. But it was a small. Less terrible, but still, it was.
Yes.
Thousands.
What is so interesting here in Rosa's work, which is amazing, that the trauma is now only now, after so many years of work that you're doing, the trauma, while she is releasing emotions, now the trauma comes back, and only now that you get to know it. meaning the work you're doing is helping not only Jay, but also the family.
Absolutely.
The family is releasing the trauma, allowing itself to look into this point, look into this silence, opening the emotions, which I was trying to cite at the beginning, opening, there is a lot of information there. She has to hold it for all of them, all generations. She should shut up.
All right, so may I ask our audience if they have other questions, who want to ask something to our presenters?
I see Paula Vizzello wants to say something.
Yes.
Vizzello, sì.
I put two questions that I addressed to Singleton, but it's fine. And if anyone answered to this, I was asking about comorbidity in SDA. Do you think we can identify depression as a diagnosis? If we think about pain to support fear of thinking, as you said, perception and separation anxiety. I mean, can we really diagnose depression as a comorbidity in autism spectrum disorders, you think? Or it's too hard, or we are not allowed to? What do you think about that?
I think obviously some children, especially teenagers, would meet the diagnostic criteria for depression. However, I don't necessarily think in terms of, I don't tend to split things apart like that so much. I tend to try to understand things altogether. It's not saying that sometimes antidepressants may not work. I personally have, the child that I worked with the longest and the most intensively went through a really tough time when he was an adolescent. And it was only once I got through that he talked about how suicidal he'd been and wouldn't tell anybody. What we saw mostly in him were rage attacks and just a real sense of injustice in his fighting things. But I was not aware until afterwards how seriously depressed he was. So yes, you can obviously have a depression, for sure. But I don't think of it as much different in autism than in other people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bill. Sara Micotti. Sara, can you unmute your microphone?
Here I am. Thank you very much for your contributions. I would like to share a clinical observation, thinking about J case and the function of reclamation by Anna Alvarez, reminded by Paul Moore, and something from French psychoanalysis. Geneviève Haag, Didier Uzel, and other child psychoanalysts speaks about a particular pre-play done by very young children suffering from early depression, and they use the space of the consulting room. They explore as an extension of the body of the analyst. It's a very slow passage in the clinical development, a sort of a pre-play. So I was imagining the very creative idea of young Rosa to explore the city districts in which the Jay and the family lived. And I feel that this is connected with the experience of the exile experienced by the paternal family as Francesco suggested before. No, so the district has an expansion of the consulting room, and then 30 years after, we find again this that is at the border between seeking system and playing system, according to me. The exploration of an extended space that creates containment, holding, and the possibility of transformation of sensation towards thoughts. Thank you if you can develop this. Thank you very much.
Sarah, was it a question particular addressed to Bill or to someone else? Sarah, can you hear me? You were to Paul.
To Paul, and maybe Francesco or Rosa.
Paul, do you want to say something more?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Sarah, for that observation. Yeah, I suppose I'm thinking more in terms of, I suppose that whole idea of exploring the consulting room, and really what's coming to mind for me is a really Kleinian way of thinking about development. And Ana Alvarez certainly talks about this, about the capacity to establish an inner world, an inner object, and a world of inner object relations. So she talks about in one of her papers how Anna Freud talks about the building of a house, and Klein talks about the building of a foundation or a basement in the house, and Ana Alvarez talks about the building of the capacity of the child to throw people out of the house, and how all that has to happen in the context of exploring the mother's body, and how that's a very early template for establishing a very rich inner world, and that brings me to the idea of the being paralyzed by fear, and this idea of the paranoid schizoid position, and being able to achieve the depressive position, which allows for some kind of learning and reparation with the mother, and calming down and development, which kind of links into Hessel's question earlier, I think, about play, and how there has to be on some level an I, a self that can in some way engage with play. And that has something to do, I think, with that system between the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex, where, not necessarily exactly in the prefrontal cortex, but in that region is where we experience our conscious experiences, our kind of theatrical experience of the world and of self and thoughts. So if that's in some way impaired, as Francesco talked about, in terms of how there's a very important pruning processes that don't take place in connection with autism developmentally, and there's an overpopulation of dendrites and connectivity. The inability to prune those connections leaves the child with a very kind of underpowered cortex. It doesn't have the accuracy and the power, if you like, and that if you can imagine, that establishes a kind of a leaky or a porous kind of eye that's not very well grounded or established. So I think in that idea of going back and exploring in the consulting room, there's a kind of a going back in the sense of Ana Alvarez to reclaim that very early space. So Ana Alvarez has a paper, or in her book Live Company, she talks about a case, Robbie, who describes his kind of black hole experiences as being thrown down a well. And that when he talks about what happens when Ana Alvarez helped him to come out of the well, he said it felt like that somebody had thrown a rope down the well and connected with him in some way. And that he experienced almost a kind of a massive shift of all the good things, like an internal world being reestablished, all these kind of good things kind of rushing back in to his mind, and he felt alive again. So I think there's something about that. But in terms of like the inability to play, you know, it's very well documented that young kids with autism, they can do single play, but they can't do parallel play, and they can't do the interactive play. And that's because you need to have that social development to eventually differentiate between self and other. And that just doesn't happen in the typical way that it does for other children. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer.
Thank you very much. Maybe Bill wants to say something about this question of the space. Yeah, unmute. Bill, unmute. Yes.
Yes, I don't have much to say to the direct question, but I really like what Paul was saying about Ana Alvarez and her, you know, work with Robbie, and how wonderful it is when you can make contact. I do think that the idea of reclamation is finding some way to get to engage with the child. I guess I can give you an example from a boy. My first session with him, he was not speaking, nonverbal, and he was about 4, 5, and he was very hyperactive and unfocused. And so in this first session, he wouldn't speak. He was running around. So what happened was that I finally kind of find some way to kind of get in his face a little bit. And then I started jabbering with him. Wah, 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 ruh, ruh. And he would jabber back, and we got all these kind of emotions. And we got this back and forth, and he was jabbering this and I was jabbering that. And I would make a sad, oh, and he would do something. And we got this interaction. And his parents said after that session, they said they had never seen him interact with a person like that before, that he really got involved. And I think that's what she's talking about. You have to kind of reach out and try to make contact with him. Now, later on, the same child would talk about how in his mind, he would give people bleedy boo-boos, meaning that he would kind of in his mind, you know, tear them up and make them bleed all over the room. And they would end up in just being a kind of like a shell, and he'd throw them in the trash. Right? And he talked about that. That's what he went on in his mind. And over the years, we've worked and about his being able to, he can keep somebody good in his mind. He can be sad. He can miss, you know, people. If they don't get him what he wants, if he doesn't get this toy, getting the new Buzz Lightyear book bag is not going to make him happy. He's in charge of being happy and all of this. And so this week, I told him I tried to rearrange the session for Saturday. I see him Saturday mornings, and I was not able to see him this Saturday because of this conference. And I'd asked his mother to rearrange things, and they couldn't rearrange them. So I told him, you know, we're not going to be able to meet Saturday. He said, well, I don't have to give you a bleedy boo-boo. I can miss you, and I can have you in my mind. And see, I think there's something about, you know, being able to work on some basic level to try to process things so you can get re-engaged with them and bring them along, kind of reclaim that land.
Would you say that what you were doing with him was regulating his emotion, helping him to regulate his emotions?
Oh, yes, exactly. Exactly. And I was helping him find some way to verbalize his emotions in that initial session, to be able to express them in some way, because basically he would just have tantrums and he would go into rages. And for a long time, even in my office, if something was not going the way he wanted it, or his mother wasn't going to do something, he would just get enraged and kick and scream, and we have to hold him down and restrain him. It was very tough work. But he's developing that capacity to put his feelings into words. And, oh, I guess when he first came in, some of his big symptoms were, he would, when people would family go for a walk and they went to a stop sign, he'd have to stop. He was fascinated with stop signs, always with stop signs, also with exit signs. And he would talk about exit signs. And I started to talk about it and put into words. I thought he wanted people to stop going away, or to exit, go away, stop, don't go away. But trying to, again, look at the meaning behind the symptom, and to, again, I think it's like regulating affects, and, you know, panic, grief, those things, instead of rage, instead of activating the rage system.
Exactly, and this is the way to the play system. You're showing us the way.
I have a question for all of you, and this is this. And we can play, I think we can play, we can explore, we can interact if there is some subject who can explore, who explores, who can play, who can explore, who can interact. If there is no subject there, like Jay, is Jay a subject of this exploration, of this playing, of this interaction? Is Jay there? Is a subject, or is a couple like Jay and her mother, like Jay and me, the subject of this exploration, playing, and blah, 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 blah? Where is the subject of all of this? This is.
Let me respond. I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but see, I think there's something about human connection, and children can play, but they're not connected. You know, they go through the motions. And so when I'm, you know, there can be elaborate things, but I'm always trying to feel like, is somebody really doing business with me? You know what it feels like if somebody's connected. And sometimes I don't understand, and I talk about things like feelings puzzles or emotional puzzles, or what are we working on? And it's like try to put together a puzzle of the Ronnie puzzle, you know, listening here and listening there, and where does this fit, and what are we doing today? What are we working on? It's a concept that I try to introduce as early as I can. Are we really getting done what we need to get done? You know, so I think that's addressing partly what you're talking about. I'm trying to make sure that I'm making a connection and that something meaningful is happening. Does that make sense? Okay.
Dear Rosa, I think there are, sorry. I think the answer cannot be easy, in the sense that there are many levels of connections. What you are referring to, Bill, is the higher level, which there is kind of continuous transmissions of feelings, even without wording, no, in a sense, if the connection is already established. My concern is with this kind of problems, of autism, that you have to build up the basis of communications, non-verbal. For example, no, the use of imitation means a kind of enhanced mirroring, no, between the two faces. That, of course, for the autist is probably very traumatic. So you have to be extremely careful because it's too much for him or for her.
Right, I would agree. You have to be careful about that. I mean, one little girl, again, on the spectrum was telling me it's just too much, you know, sometimes. But what I try to do is I try to work at the edge. I'm pushy.
But carefully, yes.
Yeah, carefully. Sometimes I have doors slammed in my face. That's okay. But I try not to push past the limit. but I'm always trying to get at the edge, if you know what I mean. Try to keep it tolerable, but I want to get some movement in there if I can.
In fact, your example that you mimic, actually, this co-barking, between you and the patient was wonderful, because it has to do with the non-verbal, but it's very emotional.
Yes,
basic level of communication.
Yes, and we have a question from Lisha, the person who couldn't be heard. She has written the question on the chat, and it is for Bill, and it has to deal with the barking, I think. And she asks, my question is about playing and also the introduction of symbolic meaning. When is the moment to do that passage?
I try to do it whenever I can. I'm always just kind of, again, I kind of work at the edge. And it was like I was looking at this one child, young girl. I look at anime cartoons with her. And there was some play about good and evil being inside people and good being inside of people, or demons that would come out. And she said, why are you talking about it like that? This is just a cartoon. But she knows it, but she's trying to put me off. But so, yes, I'm trying to talk in a more abstract, symbolic way. People are going to, anyway, I try to do it very gently. But whenever I can, and I may do it too soon, but I'm, again, like this little boy with stop signs, I tried to give it a symbolic meaning that I think that, again, the person who said, there's always meaning and it hurts if somebody only looks at the surface. I'm always trying to, in as gentle a way as possible, connect with what's really there, what's behind, what's the meaning. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, maybe I can join you, Bill, again. And when there is the threesome, when there is free, then we can start play. So I want to go back to the question before about play, and what you was asking, Rosa. What is the essence? I think there is a change in the family now, in the whole family, which will allow, when space will come there, will open the space to discuss meaning. What Bill is saying, like the meaning, what is there? What happened? Why isn't it possible to be open to the world and to interact? And what is so scaring, we are coming in Israel from a lot of Holocaust survivors, and we see people don't talk about what has happened. It is impossible to hold all this cruelty inside, so you don't speak about it, and then you lose play. So you need, while it is opening up, then there will be a possibility of the space. So if I'm taking what Bill was saying before, you need from different system to reach this girl, and you need a family as well. Maybe there will be some contribution while you're working with the parents and her at the same time. Do you agree, Bill?
Yes. At that, at some points, the girl was very afraid of me, or would refuse to meet with me alone. And so the mother would come join us on our sessions. But over time, really from almost the very beginning, this girl's relationship with her mother improved dramatically. Most of the problems got to be between me and her. And yes, and so her life outside has improved dramatically, but it's between me and her right now.
Thank you, Bill, for your answers, and we are really sorry for the child who lost his session today, and we have stolen you. Anyway, I'm afraid that now we have to conclude our discussion and just leave 10 minutes. Rosa, can you do it in 10 minutes? the conclusions, and so that we can finish our webinar. Rosa.
Okay, here
Okay.
I am. Okay.
Yes, good.
No, yes, it's a little bit, it's 15 minutes, but I think we, I want to go through this conclusion because I cannot face all the questions, okay? But I want to give some suggestions around these patients, but above all, because of I met for the first time this patient when she was child, and now she is adult. So to me, it's very important this passage from the childhood to adulthood. And so I want to just give you some suggestions about this clinical case. And because the clinical case could be considered, I think, the starting point to reflect upon, one, the freedom of the mind to represent differentiated states with the same environmental situation and stimulation. So like the twins or the symbiotic psychosis or not symbiosis, symbiosis in psychic, or the psychoanalytical setting. So the construction of the self. When two subjects are in a psychic symbiotic relationship, what does that mean? The construction of one's own subjectivity under pressure. Bolas recently wrote about subjecticide. So the construction of one's own subjectivity under pressure, and so by extrapolation, the psychoanalytical setting can be explored through the same scenario. Two people constantly, regularly interacting in a room where moments tending to functionality alternate with moments pushing towards differentiation. There are just 4 suggestions. If we start from the assumption that the mind-body unity is essentially framed into one body, one mind, we should conclude that one body corresponds to a single mind. Clear? Naive? Too naive? This logical reasoning doesn't help us handling the subjectivity perceived by J. First issue, what kind of subjectivity does J express? Indeed, this raises the question of what the boundary of the self is, or for better say, who includes who? How much big is the self, including the other? Exploration. The experience of the lived body, I'm alive, may be considered as the first essential manifestation of the bodily self. In minimal terms, it's this experience, the lived body, that shapes mindedness, belongingness, and also the sense of ownership and agency. We know Jay experienced herself as the Barbie doll of her mother. And she's a Barbie. She draws continuously Barbie girl saying, it's me. Where is the subject? That means her sense of ownership is not sure. What is sure, perhaps, is the agency, as her mindedness manifests itself through movement exploration. Waiting for her mother's thoughts, I wrote, Jay seems a chargeless robot. She turns herself off. So even the agency is not sure. Furthermore, she wants me frozen. No movement, no change. This is my countertransference yesterday and today. The analytical situation has been frozen for many years, I think, for the entire duration of the first psychotherapy. Could we say that? No ownership, no agency, no self into the first psychoanalytical sessions meant the therapist has never existed for J. This is the trauma for the first psychotherapy. So this go back to the patients. This first minimal self appears strongly deficient since its inception with a constitutive biological weakness of both the sense of ownership and agency. Second issue, how does a self, which was born so weak, interact with the other in autism, in psychosis, or other psychopathologic situation? Considering that the brain's intrinsic, we talked about this last webinar, okay? I go on with this. Considering that the brain's intrinsic or spontaneous activity encodes self-specific information, encodes subjective information of the past, the present, and the future. It's this difference in intrinsic activity that allows for constructing the self. Therefore, the subjectivity of any individual, even if the internal or the external stimulus inputs are the same. These various sensory stimuli are integrated in the spontaneous intrinsic activity. We call that multisensory integration. Multisensory integration promotes the development of a new representational product. Licia reacted questions about the symbolization through a neural process in which single or multiple stimuli are integrated and recombined. Third issue about this, what happens if the subject cannot go through this multisensory integration? I above pointed out the central role of the brain spontaneous activity and multisensory integration in shaping our subjective experience. Compare that to the ocean. Imagine the ocean. You can see small, fast waves and big, slow waves occurring in variable time intervals and different spatial extension. We can say the ocean displays in its intrinsic temporal-spatial dynamics. That temporal-spatial dynamics is not purely intrinsic, not only intrinsic, since it's strongly shaped by the respective environmental context, the epigenetic, like the wind, the beach, the sand, the rocks. Now, imagine several surfers try riding on the waves. The temporal-spatial dynamics of the waves may smash them against each other, or they may surf in parallel with each other, mirroring the respective other. That process compares to multisensory integration. In the same way, the waves integrate the link the various surfers together. In the same way, the brain spontaneous activity integrates the different sensory inputs. This is exactly what happens in our clinical case. The mother signifies the environmental context which, like the wind, shapes her daughter's mind, namely, shapes her brain spontaneous activity. That abnormally strong shaping may be due to either an abnormally strong and divisive mother, or, I said, or, and alternatively to an abnormally weak spontaneous activity in the daughter's brain, whose intrinsic dynamic is easily prone to taken over, completely shaped by the temporal-spatial dynamics of her mother brains, through her behavior, through her context, obviously. The daughter consequently integrates the various sensory inputs always, not often, always in reference to her mother, meaning the mother's input shape any subsequent, any future multisensory input and integration, even from sources outside the mother, the context. The daughter thus seems to remain unable to develop her own baseline functioning that serves as reference for any subsequent future stimulus processing, including multisensory integration. Therefore, the daughter's baseline functioning is the one of the mother. That is why the daughter perceives and acts in the world through her mother, whilst outside the realm of her mother's realm, she remains unable to even speak and communicate with others. Her mother hence provides the substitute of her own individual baseline functioning that is lacking in the daughter. Fourth issue, what if her slow mental functioning has been one of the causes of the retarded growth and maturation of the structure of the self? Some consideration about psychopathology. We may assume it is a form of autism spectrum disorder featured by an extremely long-lasting and restricted space in her subjective inner consciousness. Actually, I don't believe it is a case of schizophrenia, psychosis symbiotic, or psychosis AD, because they are characterized by the fragmentation of the inner time consciousness, but rather a case with an abnormally long-lasting time scale, as in many autism. I consider this, for better say, a neurodevelopmental disorder whose outcome depended on, I repeat, whose outcome depended on the category of treatment received. If we don't intervene with an integrated treatment in developmental age, the result, the outcome, the exit in the long run is always a poor development of all the function of the self. That means we promote maladaptive plasticity. Singletary points to maladaptive plasticity as one of the mechanisms that produce the severity of the disorder if no timely intervention is undertaken. I would like to add, if no integrated multiple intervention is undertaken. Multiple intervention means not parents and teacher, but many different psychotherapists, speech therapists, psychomotor therapists, psychotherapists, a lot of therapists. A multiple intervention prevents the iatrogenic effects of a single or wrong therapy. In the transition from childhood to adult life, our patient was able to cope with many developmental steps through the first intervention. However, coping was not sufficient for her to manage social skills. The neurobiological vulnerability in space and time processing prevented their further evolution. This is well described by Watanabe. He talked about in the adult autism about the intrinsic time scales was shorter in the visual primary sensory visual areas and longer in the right caudate. This longer intrinsic time scale in the caudate in autism was associated with the severity of repetitive restricted behavior, means in stereotyped behavior versus no integration, no visual integration. When we have all this stereotyped behavior, there is any visual integration. This is a silent circuit. Silent circuit means the incoming stimulus goes through preferential pathway, and it's difficult. Who works with the autism know this. It's difficult to make it switch to other pathway. We have a lot of studies about connectivity, and they talk about neurotypical organization. I think we should talk about neuroatypical organization. And a lot of, we have a lot of debate around this with reports, general overconnectivity, underconnectivity, combination of both. I think classifying autism using brain connectivity is complicated by the heterogeneous nature of this condition. And so at the same time, we went back to the atypical neurodevelopmental model. I would like to stress this because the atypical neurodevelopmental model highlights that psychopathologies may have different outcomes depending on, I repeat, depending on the treatment and the timing. Consequently, due to neuroplasticity modeling, the diagnosis can range between various extremes, from simple speech disorder, to mutism, to autism. This is a range, a very large range of psychopathology. To sum up, and so I conclude. A subjective time scale is no longer dynamic, but static. It's almost frozen at the time of her childhood, when it first developed as in close interaction with her mother. The duration of her subjective timescale is extremely long. Such extremely long-lasting timescale prevents her from changing, accommodating, updating. This is a typical feature of autism, where patients are extremely slow relative to the faster environment. So today, the first psychopathological feature in these patients is the extremely long duration of her inner time consciousness. We conclude in 20 years. The second psychopathological feature is her abnormally restricted subjective space. She lives in her room, in her childhood space. Any deviation from that space cannot be integrated, since her subjective space remains too restricted and static and related to her long-lasting time scale. You can figure the molecules of a gas. The molecules of a gas are very thin, very far from each other. And if there is very far from each other, there is no the right environmental pressure that brings them, these molecules, closer and moves them. The right pressure, not the higher pressure. Higher pressure means excitement, but the right pressure sometimes, I think, could be the therapist by introducing the reality, no representation of fantasy, but the reality, the here and now for the relationship into the intersubjective exchange. In our case, this intersubjective exchange was, I think, strongly effective. Freud calls this catexis, therefore able to promote new investments, long-lasting from the past to the present, projected to the future, therefore able to promote memory consolidation, reconsolidation, and above all, to promote new history. New history means subjectivation. Outside the familiar scheme means placed in a physical, mental space outside the usual space is room, therefore able to promote new temporal spatial maps. This psychodynamic psychotherapy, I think, has been able to introduce just small changes. In which direction? We can say towards autonomy, that is, the acquisition of some more adaptive, small social skills, even if not extremely performative. I wrote, this new opening leads her to painfully realize the isolation in which she has lived. She said, I feel crazy because if my past had been different, I'd be another J now. Or we can say, I feel crazy because if my past psychotherapy had been different, I'd be another J now. So we cannot change that. We cannot change today the defenses built on painfulness, because that would mean for these patients fragmentation, disintegration, psychosis, the other extreme. So I think we should tolerate sometimes her discontent to live speechless in this time full of communication, extremely social performative, and she doesn't fit to this world. This is my idea. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rosa. Thank you so much. And these conclusions were really interesting. And I would say that in the end, we can finish our webinar thinking to build model, and also to this idea you were explaining that these patients need an integrative treatment, not only the psychoanalytic, not only one person therapy, but a team that can take into account the different problems that this kind of difficult cases bring. So thank you so much. That's been a really interesting morning or afternoon, depending on which part of the world you are. But really, it has been a pleasure to meet you all, and let's see again very soon with IPD.